Hold on a second. All right, we are live. This is the next installment. I just checked. I think it's been 8 months since we've had one. So this is like the really late dawn patrol. So it's kind of like more like a brunch. Yeah, I checked. Yeah, it was like October 1st, I think was our last one.
Jeez.
Time flies, right? When you're having fun. So speaking of time flying, what have you all been up to, or what has the crew been up to? Because I know ATG, of course, is a good amount of folks now, right? So what has been the haps? What is the latest?
Chris, you want to take that first?
Okay, we've gotten Clear the Coast out, and we got in Mahan's wake Form 10s got out. Both of them required a little more work on Larry's and my part than we were hoping. So that delayed me getting back into Commonwealth Navies. We're hoping the Form 10s are popular, but right now the sales are showing it's the same as all the others, which is abysmal. So we keep getting occasional demands for Form 10 products, but they don't sell. I mean, they just don't go.
I was just going to give a quick preview of the table of contents. I do want to show you that. I do want to show the audience that this one in particular is extremely well done. I have to give Cheng Li credit for this. I'm assuming a lot more people were involved, of course, too. But one thing I really liked about this, which I don't know if you have you done this. Have you done this? Pages required in all of your.
No. This was something that Cheng Li suggested, and it's a good suggestion. We just never really thought about tagging all the pages to a scenario.
That was awesome, and quite honestly, I only ran into it when I looked again because I always jumped to the classes when I was just trying to find whatever I was trying to find. But speaking of classes, just to kind of give you a breadth, an idea of the absolute sheer breadth of this, I'm pretty sure that this is almost all of the active surface fleets of pretty much 1900, right? I mean, that's pretty much the target year. But there is just an absolute significant amount, and it's not just to two countries in Mahan's wake. He included a lot of good what if scenarios and so forth.
Yeah.
So
Peter, can you scroll down and show some of the pages, some of the individual Form 10s? Because
I'll show the first one because the first one's really nice. It's from Argentina. So here's the Almirante Brown battleship, the 1897 configuration. I do like that you also included multiple configurations of the same ship if there were significant changes. This is beautiful. First of all, the top-down imagery is really nice and clear and crisp. Who did the artwork on this? Do you remember?
Cheng Li.
Ah, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I mean the guy did it all, and props for the amount of work required and his organizational skills.
Yeah, this is
very impressive.
Yeah, the fact that he was able to kind of more directly integrate the original chart in a nice way, in a visually appealing way. But I love this, first of all. We've also, of course, had the two SITREPs since we last talked. I'll just show the table of contents page, just right to the top contents. Was there anything particularly fun that you worked on in this SITREP? Some of these the Chinese aircraft or the fighter bomber attack sections, or what was your most enjoyable thing working on in this SITREP?
Well, it's a lot of new information is basically what we were presented with. When I come up to do a SITREP starting a couple months ahead of time, I look in the bucket and see what people have submitted and try and balance things out. And in addition, we've got the big news that Sweden and certainly Finland joining NATO. So we got to get their ships out there. The stuff in the SITREP is extant Swedish and Finnish naval and aircraft units. When we come time to do NATO North, hopefully by then Sweden will have been admitted, which is Gorka Martina's project right now. We'll have all of Sweden from 55 forward and all of Finland from 55 forward. So that'll be a much larger chunk of material. But this gets us started at least, and introduces players to the idea that the Swedes are now in the party.
And then speaking of Finland, of course, you followed up with SITREP 64, which includes a significant amount of annex information for Finland, which I enjoyed a great deal. I also did enjoy your book reviews for both, one of which was by this weirdo named Peter, and this other weirdo named Larry, of course. So back at you, though. I've stolen the screen there too long. What other back to product updates beyond what I just showed?
Well, while Chris is plowing through Commonwealth Navies and Aircraft, which will be another 2-book set, there was just too much material to put in a single volume. I've been working ahead. We have a High Tide, which is in sort of draft. I've had to make a lot of changes to it and update scenarios. Chris has to add some material on aircraft data link for GCI fighter control. And it turns out the fighters were not as flexible in Soviet air defense as we've been led to believe. So there's going to be some limitations put on their capabilities. And then beyond that, I've been working on another project by Chang Lei called Birth of the PLAN, which, from our viewpoint, is new history. It's going to be battles, surface battles and air battles between, let me see if I can get this right. Most of them are between communist forces and nationalist forces in the 40s and 50s. There are a few clashes, a clash between the Brits and China, a Hong Kong incident called the Pearl River incident. And there's a hypothetical one involving the U.S. It's an area we very rarely explored. And Chang Lei has just given us all kinds of information, obviously coming from sources that have not been translated into English. Among other things, he's doing such a good job of digging through these early Chinese aircraft and ship specs that will probably reissue China's Navy at the same time as we release Birth of the PLAN, because he's given us so much new material. Additionally, this is June, so I guess we should make a formal announcement. We release a quarterly update of a modern Chinese maritime forces. We've got to switch to a new edition, a new print edition. Manfred Meyer has given us 2 whole new sections for modern Chinese maritime forces, covering ships of the Chinese Army and ships of the Chinese Air Force. Who knew? That's not the name of one of the ships. They add enough pages, so in addition to being an update, this will be a new edition. And I want to spell this out clearly for anybody who's watching. If you have modern Chinese Maritime Forces print edition, you're obviously going to have to buy a new version you're going to have to buy a new copy to get this new material. But in addition, we're zeroing out the PDF as well. This will be, it will say second edition on it rather than just saying printing, because this is a new book replacing the first one. So even if you have the old PDF, you're going to have to buy the new PDF. And it's just, there's that much new material, and we had to put that much work into updating it, correcting it. And the thing just keeps growing. It really does. So that's I think is fairly big news, and that'll be in the July release of the book. Manfred's still getting last minute changes to me. I expect there'll be some as late as late June, but That's the beauty of digital publishing. I can put the stuff in literally at the last moment. The only problem will be it will be off the shelf. The print version will be off the shelf for 2 weeks while we go through the approval and proof process. But then it'll be available again as a second edition. So, Chris, am I missing anything?
Not products wise. I mean, and I think you said Birth of the PLAN will be a cast supplement.
Oh, I did not mention. Yeah, we're talking 1940s and 1950s, which falls under Command at Sea, which is fine. There are no guided missiles at this point. There are no data links at this point. It's definitely.
But you're also thinking or planning that he's also Cheng has also provided enough information to cause. Are we also going to see a Chinese Navy annex update as well from information?
China, as I said, we will update China's Navy at the same time as we release.
There will be scenarios for Harpoon, early Harpoon for the China time frame.
Okay.
They're not quite as sexy as I mean, we'll have the Paracels in there where they take it away from Vietnam. You'll have some of the Spratley stuff, but that's not a whole lot of big guns. It's small stuff really, but the time frame is in Harpoon. So Larry and I are allergic to spanning a scenario supplement between two.
Let's not blur that's bad.
We bifurcate, based on the rules. So Chang Lei has a fair amount of scenarios to work on that. And
I should mention, by the way, that Chang Lei has given us additional material that definitely falls into the Harpoon timeframe. Yeah. That's going to be the next thing he works on after we get Birth of the PLAN out the door.
So then you were also saying that High Tide is still in motion. You think it's in like a first or second draft format. But what about the Commonwealth navies? How's that coming?
I'm into Canada right now in the review. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be, Australia, Canada, the UK, and New Zealand.
Okay.
1955 to present.
There you go.
That's a lot of ships.
There's a lot of ships, and there are some entries that we toyed around with that they're not even hypothetical. These were proposals, so gone.
Did a article on them if anybody cares.
Am I remembering this wrong? That you were going to release it in two parts, or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ships and aircraft. There's just way too many.
I didn't even know if possibly even the navies would have been split too, but yeah. Okay.
No. We talked about that initially, but it just made more sense to put the Commonwealth together because they use a lot of the same systems.
Right.
So the other annexes are basically the same outside of Annex A.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot of overlap in weaponry. Yeah. Very good. I think you've answered this. This question came from Discord, by the way. And then there was a separate, you've kind of answered that with this, but how are things going overall roadmap wise for the annex? Are we looking like end of year?
I'd say fall. I'm in Canada. I mean, the UK is the biggest one, obviously. And there's a lot of stuff where we got holes that's got to be filled, particularly early data links for the Brits and the Australians are problematic. So we're trying to fill that stuff in. And then at the same time, make sure we fill in all the information we need for the aircraft, like Shackletons and Nimrods were particularly vexing. But I was able to get some good data on what they had for Saunaboys and what they could do. So the Nimrod was problematic. I only got one source that finally told me what they had.
One product. This is a question I had as well. How Captain's Edition 2.0 is going? If that
is next year. Okay. I mean, There's just only so much. I mean, on top of all the stuff we're doing, Larry and I put together an appendix for the Naval War College's China Amphibious Warfare book that is now been submitted, and I think it's going to be the Naval War College Press, not the Naval Institute, that does this one. And then I'm working on finishing up my paper that for the presentation I did at the China Undersea Warfare conference, and I'm going to take that presentation, put in a little bit more of the historical data into it because they didn't give me a lot of time, and historical stuff doesn't matter that much to them. It's like, what are they doing now? What have you done for me lately? And then we'll present that at Historicon, which is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and then we'll do another Dawn Patrol soon thereafter, and I'll give it here so that people who don't get to the convention can see that presentation as well. And the War College will be producing a book with individual articles in it, and mine will be part of that. So we've been really bloody busy.
All right. Well, Chris, I think we were thinking of talking about the Michael Glynn book, Airborne Anti-Submarine Warfare, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. It was reviewed by Larry. I think it was in SITREP 63. I want to say that. Yes. So if you want his opinions on that, of course, you can ask him, but I'm sure it'll come out in this conversation. But that was a good book review you had done on that. That got me to buy the book, by the way, Larry. So,
I'm sure Mr. Glynn is very happy with that. I mean, I wish I'd had that when I was in ASW school.
Yeah,
not that it would have told me. I mean, they did teach me some fairly nuts and bolts stuff.
Right, very specific things.
I could do the job. But going on to the airborne side, and by the way, as a surface warfare ASW officer, my favorite kind of ASW was airborne. The first thing they teach you in ASW school is how to send aircraft out after the sub, because you don't want to get close to the sub. The sub can bite back. So far, no ASW aircraft has ever been shot down by a sub. I think I can say that fairly equivocally. So that's just
not yet.
Not that they haven't tried.
Not that they haven't tried.
So this is definitely the best form of ASW in my opinion. What's fun about this book is that he's very methodical. He's speaking to operators. So when you're reading this, you're getting the straight scoop. He's not explaining it to civilians. He's teaching new operators how to do their job. And that's shown by some of the later chapters where he's talking about how to manage the crew on your aircraft. Okay, which I read just out of curiosity, not that I intend to have a crew to manage. There's some very good stuff, which I think, Chris, you should talk about, because I understood about half of it on acoustics. He really gets down to the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, I'll be touching a little bit onto that.
Very good. Chris, the floor is yours, and we'll loop back to crowd questions here, and there are a few more questions from Discord, but please, Chris, take your time.
Okay. All right.
You're good.
My overall review. First of all, realize this is a discussion from a pilot's perspective. All right. This is not an acoustic operator perspective. So there are holes, and there's a pretty big one in my opinion. But the good part of it basically echoes a lot of what Larry had in his review. Good overview of airborne ASW, to include a historical review. It was a good overview of acoustics. It was actually pretty fundamental and basic. He did not get too deep into it. But the description of the acoustic propagation paths was really good and very helpful in understanding how they do planning based on their search concepts. Reasonable discussion on general submarine and aircraft characteristics. what's an aircraft good for, what's its pros, what's its cons, that sort of thing. And he actually did a really good job talking about basic sonobuoy patterns. However, his discussion on submarine acoustics was old, and it left something to be desired. And the biggest flaw is he never touched the sensors at all, which I have no idea why, because of the amount that's out there in the open source. To include the U.S. Navy's sonobuoy manual, it's unclassified. There really was no reason not to cover the sensors and the processors. There's a ton out there. So if we just look at overall, what does a ship or a submarine look like? And where does this fit in this discussion that he's got? You can see it here down here. There's this thing called LOFAR. Okay, that's one of the earlier LOFAR ranges. The buoys actually, later on get up to about here. But we're thinking, when you talk LOFAR, you're looking at this stuff here. That is the narrowband signature. You've got shaft rates, blade rates, and then you've got diesel numbers here, firing rates, that sort of thing. These are the things that stick out. This is what a sonobuoy wants to look at. Initially, we were looking at this. That's what the AQA3, AQA4, and the SQQ28 looked for. Later on, we started looking at these, your steady state narrowband tonals. And then you got some other things out here that you can look at. And then you can see where I've broken up the harpoon sonar bands down at the bottom, so you get an idea of where we are with those. So initially, the big thing was propellers. Okay, when we were detecting Novembers and Echoes at thousands of miles with SOSUS, yeah, I'm saying thousands, it was because of propeller blade rate, and especially cavitation blade rate. So when we read their histories that the Charlie Victors, Yankee and Deltas were a lot quieter, a lot of people go, well, no, they're not. From a propeller perspective, yes, they are. Big time. Now, what you see up here is a Victor 1 propeller. That was a huge improvement over what the November had. First of all, there was one propeller. Its max RPM was lower. And because it was bigger, they could spread out the pressure differential. And turning slower, it didn't cavitate as much. I mean, November's cavitated very easily. What they went to next was what we call a double four-bladed screw. Again, to try and slow things down, break up where the thrust was being put into the smaller bits. And this helps reduce the vibration. The problem is every reduction, you make the propeller less efficient. So you can lose. My boat lost 2 knots going from a 5-bladed screw to a 7. Okay, here we have a 7-blade, highly skewed scimitar. Again, you're trying to ease how the propeller blades cut into the wake field, because that's what causes it to thump, and that's where you get your noise. Pump jets are even better in that they turn even slower. They're shorter. They're more robust, so they don't vibrate as much, and you augment the flow before it even gets to the rotor. Problem with a pump jet, they're 3 to 4 times heavier than an open wheel, and they cost a lot more. And if you're going to stay at slow speeds, there's really no difference. The U.S. developed 7-bladed screws to deal with cavitation and blade rate. At the same time, the Brits developed pump jets. You stay below about 8 knots, it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. You get above 10, pump jet's superior. So here's a little declassified comparison I got out of one of the Naval War College engagement analyses pubs from 1973-74. And you can see that, you know, if a hen is cavitated, and they cavitated at really small speed, look at that, 6-7 knots they could be cavitating, depending upon their depth. If they weren't, there was about a 5 dB difference, maybe 4. But once you start cavitating, look at how big the changes get. And realize with these sort of distances, every 3 dB, every 3 decibels is a doubling of range. So at 10 knots, if you've got a Victor out there who's not cavitating in comparison to a November, the November is going to be detected at something like 8 to 10 times the range. That is a huge difference. And that's why the Russians in their history can say that the second generation was a lot quieter, because from a propeller perspective, they were. Now, here's the other problem. After you get rid of the propeller noise, it gets down to the propulsion plant. And vibrations can find their ways through primary and secondary structural paths into the water. And your big thing is to try and isolate these. And this is where I take exception with Mr. Glenn's book. He says on page 28 that machinery and drivetrains became increasingly quiet and were mounted on noise dampening mounts known as rafts. That is wrong. Simply putting them on sound isolation mounts is single level. That's not what raft means. Okay, and these are diagrams from a Chinese publication, and this is a Russian rubber metal mount, which is very similar to ours. This is what early submarines had. They're pretty good. They're not, they're not horrid, but it's not a raft, and there's a big difference between them. The next thing you have is what we call double isolation. You got 2 sets of sound mounts. You have an intermediate mass, but that intermediate mass section is not a raft. It's not big enough. You need more mass to do that. This is better still. This is what you see. This is a Type 209 diesel generator section. So this is better. But when you're talking raft, you're talking big. Now, the smallest submarine that had a raft, it was the Alpha, and you can see its ring raft down there. This was the first Soviet boat with a raft. And what that is a large metallic item on which all the propulsion plant equipment was hung, and that was then isolated from the hull. This was then showed up on the Victor II and on the Victor III, and probably the Delta IV. It's not the best raft. It's not massive enough. If you want to do what the Brits did, or what the Russians did with the Akula that you see up there, you need a big pressure hull diameter. You're talking 10, 11 meters. And you need that space. This is what allows the submarine to really start getting quiet. You can see there's sound mounts here underneath the individual components. Then you have this huge mass, which is itself isolated from the hull. That is what really gets you quiet, and that did not happen till the 3rd gen boats. This did not happen till the 3rd gen submarines. And the Sierra's pressure hull is too small to do a lot of what you see in an Akula. That's why a Sierra is not as quiet. Now, the Russians have a very nice historical book on the contributions of their scientific community, and this shows you pretty much the 4 generations that they had up through the improved Akula. So, you've got no raft, just mounts to the deck with some vibration isolation material, not great coatings, and very simple, small, flat propellers. They then went to intermediate masses. And in the case of the Victor 3, the ring raft, they started using more isolation techniques like flexible couplings, better sound mounts, much bigger and deeper coatings. And then they started working with skewing the blades a little bit and doing like the double fours. When the Akulas came out, they actually had a raft. They were using pneumatic mounts. They were using thick, more advanced coatings, and they were going to highly skewed propellers. With the Akula 2, they've gone to what's called a truss raft, which means that this is a bunch of beams with acoustic dampening material or absorption material inside it. They're isolating the shaft line from the bulkhead better. They're going to multi-purpose coatings. Most of these are anechoic or decoupling, single function. They're now going into multi-purpose coatings, and they're starting to talk more advanced things like pump jets. Now, when we look at the 5th gen quieting, this is probably what's on 885. This was found in a patent information from 2006. The entire engine room is enclosed in capsules, and the capsules themselves are isolated. So it was really, this is really new, and these are huge, huge sound isolation mounts, massive mounts. So what it means is, these are from ONI's unclassified books, 1995-96. They haven't done another one, so it's unfortunate. But you can see the progression over time. One thing I want to call out is I made a correction here. In the original one, this was called the Akula, and this was the improved Victor 3. No Victor 3 on the planet is going to be quieter than an Akula. And you'll see down here, ONI corrected that in 1996. Okay, this is a 9-meter pressure hull. That's a 10.9 meter pressure hull. They're not even remotely the same. The thing I want to show here is because Mr. Glenn makes comments that nuclear submarines, they're bigger, they're noisier than diesels. Wrong answer. You need that volume to get quiet. You can see down here that a 688i is quieter than most diesel boats out there, except for the 636 kilo, and that's because it's running around with pneumatic mounts. So you can't make the generalization that a nuke boat is noisier than a diesel, and that because it's bigger, that's problematic. If you don't have the volume, you don't have the size, you can't get the quieting. Let's talk a little bit about submarine target strength. Initially, right after World War II, it was suggested that it was the outer hull that was causing the reflected of the echo, which is why you see people saying that single hull submarines have smaller target strength than double hull. No, not so much. More recent studies is showing that it's the pressure hull, because it's the air that's doing the reflecting. If you've got a 10 millimeter, 15 millimeter outer hull thickness of steel, that's almost transparent to the acoustic pulse. There's a little bit of a reflection. The driver is the air, because there's a significant change in the speed of sound between water and air, and that's what causes the reflection. The other problem is he says that conventional submarines, because of their diminutive, makes them more difficult to detect with an active sonar. Maybe. I've got two spreadsheets up here. One shows a purely academic approach. That's the finite cylinder. And then one over here uses a World War II or a 1950s equation based on World War II data. Okay, when you look at this, just look at the relative values. Okay. A kilo is almost the same size, target strength-wise, as a sea wolf. I mean, a Type 205, which is really a small submarine, is 75%. Now, if you look at these numbers over here, these are more reflective, if you'll pardon the pun, as to real active target strength, because measurements of Gato class was between 25 and 27 decibels on the beam, pounding on a broad target. And if you look at that there's basically a 4 decibel difference between a World War II Gato boat and a Sea Wolf, which is 5 times its size, 4 times. This is because target strength is a log value. And in both cases, it's a logarithmic function. This is the finite cylinder equation here for a beam impact with the sound. So if you're 2-3 times the size, it's not much of a difference. So if you look between Project 877, that's about 29 decibels. This is 31. Okay, that's 2 decibel difference. And remember, active sonar, you divide the total by 2. So this turns into 1 decibel difference. There's not a lot of difference between these two boats in terms of active range. So his comment, that's what it used to be believed. That's not the case. Plus, you also have to remember, we got these things. And in the case of the Russians, it's really pretty. It's pretty messy. These 2 pictures here. The top 2 are from a Typhoon. Where the one to the left is inside the real big sail. This is the conning tower. That's a decoupling coating. What that means is that it absorbs acoustic energy being radiated by the hull. The one to the right is the anechoic coating. And this particular one is about 70 centimeters thick. That's 3 inches thick. And notice the little Gulf tees here. As you go down in depth, this compresses and these turn into hemispheres. And this helps break up the active sonar pulse. This is the Augustite coating. This is second-gen boats mostly. It's also on the Typhoons and some of the other ones. As far as Saunaboys, and I saw your comment, Peter, that he was, under more scrutiny. It doesn't matter. Here, look at this. Saunaboy reference guide, Nav Air. It's unclassified. Okay? You've got these guys. These guys worked in the Saunaboy field for the Navy. Clive Redley's done the same thing from the UK side. Yefrem Gordon has a wonderful section on the Russians, to including telling us what the Type 75 Saunaboy really was supposed to do. The Type 75 wanted to find blade rate. They were looking between 2. They had the full frequency spectrum was 2 to 60 hertz, and they were really looking at 2 to 40. They were really looking for blade rate. And they were doing it what I would call a fat LOFAR approach. It means that the analysis window for the frequency bins was wide. It wasn't narrow like we do since the AQA5. And then there's discussions about processors and who had what in the official Orion history and the Neptune histories. So there's a lot of data out there. Now, a lot of this got moved into, all this data has been moved into America's aircraft, Russia's aircraft, and it will go into the Commonwealth. That's where you see a lot of that sort of thing. as far as sonar reflectivity, basically we assume a 25 dB target broad. That's just about everybody. We do incorporate coatings, and they do get involved there. So we do not get into individual class sizes. I'm not ready to go there. That would make the we did initially, if you remember, we had large submarines had a big bonus. Not so much. So that's pretty much my overview there. His discussion about search, localization and attack, or search, localization, tracking, and attack are very general. They're not, I don't want to say it's obvious, but they're not particularly helpful in figuring out what they're doing. And that's probably because you got to get into actual sonobuoy employment and sonobuoy types.
I'm going to rewind to his chapter 1, if you don't mind. I don't know how many more slides you have here, but what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the full spectrum ASW and how he covered that? Obviously, was it? I can't remember his rank, but give me 1 second. It was based on William J. Tody's article on full spectrum ASW. I don't know if he was an admiral or not. Sorry, I don't know his rank. But what are your thoughts in general on that, and how that was presented in the book, but also more directly? I personally feel like the first chapter and then the characteristic chapters are probably the ones that are most directly useful for a Harpoon 5 GM, if you will, to create scenarios more than anything.
Right.
That's the way I look at it. But how accurate do you feel like that coverage was, or what would you recommend? What would you recommend a Harpoon player?
It's good doctrinal discussions. What they don't get into is full spectrum ASW requires communications. And, there's a time delay from any strategic sensor, SOSUS, CERTAS, or fixed distributed system. They provide queuing. NATO aircraft really can't work very well to find anything if they're not queued. And Glenn makes that very clear, that a lot of their search planning is based on where they know they need to go. In fact, he's got a section in there where he talks about Bayesian analysis, which is kind of interesting. And it's I was a little surprised. He's right, but the whole point is that Western aircraft don't just go out and to a part of water and say, "Oh, that looks like a lovely place," and throw out buoys. The Russians do. The Russians assign aircraft search areas where they do area search without any queuing. Is that
Particularly because they have more passive sonobuoys of a cheaper cost? I mean, I know that.
In fact, the Type 75, their search pattern was initially restricted to 24 channels. We were up to 99 by then, and you could throw out 60 search buoys without even blinking. So they just didn't have SOSUS. And in their particular water area, they can't exploit the deep sound channel. It's too shallow. So they made up for it how they could. And they just throw, they pick an area, they assign a bare F to it, and they say, go forth and conquer. I mean, the BE-12 male and the IL-38 May at one point in time did concurrent MAD searches. That's why I had to put them in Harpoon 5. They were the big thing with the Russians. They threw out their RGB buoys and said, whatever. And then they started running MAD searches. That's how limited they were. So when you talk about full spectrum, you're trying to incorporate all possible avenues. Now, what Larry said about sending aircraft out, that's really what we can do with full spectrum. Aircraft and ships have a much better way to communicate and coordinate. We don't talk much with, when submarines are out there, largely because we don't want to be anywhere near you guys.
Bad things happen.
Yeah, they classify with ordnance. They don't look.
I think the Russians also were willing to conduct those mad searches and those uncued Saunaboy searches because they were not looking for our attack subs. They were looking for ballistic missile submarines.
Yep.
And I have not done the math, but I suspect that many of those area searches were done within where the launch range of a Polaris missile or a Trident missile would begin. So they simply took every tool that they had and applied it to finding ballistic missile submarines. The Moskva class. Did anybody ever think that they were going to actually find a boomer with a Moskva? Well, they were willing to try. So that's sort of where I'm going with that.
Initially, Larry, I would agree with that. When the Bear F came out, it was bastion defense. It was a bastion barrier because they knew they couldn't survive out in the Atlantic where we were patrolling. So, I mean, there was no fighter escort, and just getting past Iceland was going to be a bugger. So the Bear Fs in particular started being one of the probably the outmost layer of the bastion. And they were about, I would say they were about 10 to 15 years behind us in execution, because our biggest issue was steady state tonals at that point, and they were looking at blade rate, which is what we did with the SQQ-28 and AQA 3s and 4s in the early 60s. And they put that IOC'd in like, what, 80, 82? And the reason why they were so far behind is because their computer processing was just way, way behind. If you look at, they were aware that they had a narrowband problem in 64 and 65. They knew about the blade problem. They knew about the steady state tonal problem in 1970. But even then, it took them another 10, 12 years to get systems that could actually detect those in a tactical environment.
So we do have some other individual questions here in YouTube, and there's a few extra in Discord.
Okay.
So I might just try to pick them out and get them over here. But this was a good question. I thought I had this very question recently myself.
Yes, Japan will be its own book because it's a policy faux pas to link them with the South Koreans. Both sides get angry. So the Japanese will be by themselves, and then the South Koreans are going to get folded in with
South China Sea littorals, probably.
Yeah, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, that sort of thing. Vietnam.
Very good.
Japan's first draft we can't call it Japan's Navy. We're going to call it Japan's Self-Defense Forces. Peter Grining has already assembled a lot of the material. We've simply got to get other stuff cleared out in front of it before we start another Navy's Annex.
I mean, one of the big problems and I know Larry's talked about this in the past, is that I don't want to call it a problem. It's a fact of life with our process that Larry and I will not publish anything that we haven't really scrubbed hard. And that means we become the limiting path. We have a lot of different people throwing stuff at us, and there's, that 24 hours in a day limitation is really annoying. So that's why some of this stuff looks like it's taking so long, is because there's a lot of scrubbing that needs to be done. Yes, preliminary drafts have been thrown together, but you guys have not seen the red print when we go through and chop those things. And
this is a This is a pretty weighted question from the. This is a pretty weighty question. Maybe
Well,
I don't know if you maybe give me the top. What you think the top one is? Top one. We'll go from there.
Top 5 most capable surface combatants.
In what area? I mean, to our AAW, ASW in general. That's a.
I mean, surface.
If I'm going to go multi-purpose platform overall, I mean across the board, I'd have to say the Type 55 China destroyer.
They had an article on that in proceedings about it.
It's very balanced, and they pay attention to anti-surface warfare. So after that, I mean, on an air-to-air rating, Burke's is better still, I think. ASW, we're still better. Burke's still better. A Type 45 is better.
South Korea, some of their
ADX3 that they came up. That's a good ship.
Yeah, there are some boats that actually have better specs than some of the early Burkes.
Yeah. So it really gets down to what's your definition of most capable? Are we looking multi-purpose, air defense, ASW, that sort of thing? So, but I got news for you. I don't include anything Russia has at the moment.
I agree.
Open up. Here you go. From Dan O. I would love to see an analysis of a scenario using drones of all types. Just a hint for a future issue of Naval SITREP.
There's plenty of places for that. What I have seen thus far, though, does not change the way I do the rules. It's all about control. How do you have control?
What have you been seeing? What have you been seeing of late from in newer developments for drones? And
well, a lot of the drones we're seeing out in the Russia-Ukraine thing, a lot of them are commercialized and off the breadboard, if you will, designs. So, and what we're not seeing is the vast majority of drones are shot down. The vast majority. That's something Larry and I had been saying for a while, that, it's really bad when the first idea that you're under attack is when your IR ball sensor sees a flare off your wing because your drone is on fire. The USVs that Ukraine's using, they're very crude. They've also been relatively ineffective because they've got fusing problem. They seem, they hit that Ivan Kurz. It does not look like it detonated, from what we can tell, from what we've gotten from feedback in theater by Russia and others. They're not going off, so no big deal. You basically gave the CO a slight AFib for a while, but other than that. But here's the problem with drones. They have crap for search. You've got to put them in the right place at the right time, which is why you see a lot of the drones being used against fixed locations. So, as far as, like the Iranian drones that run over and then crash into things and blow stuff up, yeah, there's that. But those are basically what? Really, really slow cruise missiles?
That's basically it. And you've got a blending of cruise missile. When is it a cruise missile? When is it a drone? Some of these guys are smart. Some of these guys are dumb. Some of these guys are totally human controlled. Some have smart AI. My personal feeling is that the utility of drones has clearly been demonstrated, and people are still going to work to evolve and improve the capability of drones. So we haven't seen the end of the development.
And
it hasn't really stabilized. The technology hasn't plateaued yet.
And quite frankly, what we're seeing out of Ukraine and Russia largely is much cruder, much less effective than what we've been doing in Afghanistan and Iraq with the MQ-9 family. You know, they're firing smart weapons, laser-guided weapons. They have large dwell times. Okay, so you need to really kind of look at it as to what are you trying to do and what are you trying to accomplish, and then look at what do you have to use to get some sort of result. Because like I said, I mean, the Russians have claimed they've shot down thousands of Ukrainian drones and vice versa. So not great stuff in terms of effect. They're getting a lot of great press, but I don't think they're particularly effective.
You don't think they'll be very effective with over the horizon targeting for like P8s with long range anti-ASCMs or?
Well, see, there's a difference. The drones that's being used now, I don't think so. If you link a P8 to a Global Hawk, that's an entirely different thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So you need to look at what platform you're talking about and how they're being employed. And right now we're seeing a lot of off-the-shelf stuff being thrown around. You know, it's kind of neat to have one of those quadcopters, you know, with a hand grenade that comes over and drops it onto an IFV. But you know, there's a little bit of difference between that and a Reaper who's shooting Hellfire.
This is a good one. Hold on, I got another one for you. Real quick. They're wondering if the Indian Navy will debut. Will there be any?
Yes.
Okay.
Whether or not we combine it with Pakistan is something we haven't figured out yet.
Right. So I thought. This is a good question from Dylan. All right, hold on a second. Sorry, it's a little hard to get from there. All right, here you go. This was from Dylan Jones on the Discord. What kind of information do you get from radar detection? Number of incoming missiles in a salvo, number of incoming aircraft, formation, rough size. I seem to remember you covering that in the rules as far as.
Yeah, what we've done now. Here's where it gets really weird. Larry and I don't get into the fine detail of how far apart you have to be before you distinguish. It's, you know, that's getting way too much in the weeds, Dylan. So what we tell you is when you get a radar contact, we do allow you to figure out number of incoming missiles. That's just because it makes it easier. Same with incoming aircraft. Now, if you want to be a jerk about it with as a DM, you can add a die roll to that to fuzz it up a bit. In terms of rough size of surface contacts, that is, people talk about medium blip, big blip. It all depends on its aspect, its size, and the environment in which. What does that mean? It means you can't tell squat.
Classic radar notation. I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
No, go. I'm done.
Classic radar notation from when I was in the fleet was, your NTDS symbol is 1, 2, or many. And GMs who are running a game or even players who have an expectation, are there 29 or 28 bombers in the regiment? I mean, you don't get that kind of information off of a radar blip. It's not, it's especially with longer ranged radars, you're going to know there's a blip out there. You'll probably be able to tell there's multiple targets. And that's really all you're going to get until he gets a lot closer. Of course, you want to do things before he gets a lot closer.
One of the changes I'm looking at for CAS is making radar information even more blobbish. You're just going to know you have a contact because you have really no idea as to what's out there. That's why the CICs of the time, particularly during the kamikaze attacks, were saturated. They had a lot of individual blobs, but they had no idea what was in them.
All right, so I'll end on this question. This will be from myself, and this might be a topic unto itself. Maybe we can kind of let it bridge over to our next conversation when we have. But what do you personally feel like is the area that we are most unprepared for in the South China Sea theater?
Ooh.
We've allowed our abilities to degrade both in anti-surface and anti-submarine warfare. We have overly focused on strike and anti-air.
Do you feel like this, like your answer is already a current within, the proceedings crowd, et cetera? Do you feel like that is a well-known deficiency that is being attended to?
It's a well-known deficiency. Whether or not it's being adequately attended to, I can't say. There's a lot of discussion. I'm not seeing a lot of action.
Okay.
ASW, especially in the South China Sea area, is going to be extremely different from what we're used to. Navy really likes open ocean, deep water.
And there's a particular
for subs in the Atlantic, and that's going to be a mess. I mean, we should really look at the Baltic if you want an example of what's going on in the South China Sea, which is even shallower in many places.
Right. And there's a significant difference between the Taiwan Strait and Luzon, the areas near even Luzon and Pratleys and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting.
Hey, let me answer Martin's question about satellite comms and satellite targeting. Go read the rules, Martin. Satellite acquisition and targeting is there. RORSAT, EORSAT. You also see it in terms of SAR targeting for anti-ship ballistic missiles. That's about as good as it gets right now. Satellite communications, in my opinion, it's irrelevant. We don't have to worry about it because unless you want to jam it, it's there. I mean, Link 16 is largely a satellite system. So we do have that in there. It's just not, we don't just call it out because quite frankly, comms is pretty boring to most people.
Anything that we can treat as a black box or abstract as a magic happens and we can just move on. That's our goal in this game.
I hope I think I've covered a vast majority, if not all, the questions that have come in. If anybody has a last minute question they want to ask,
I think there was a question about Chinese battle management.
Yes, there was. Hold on. Let me show that again. Yeah, there we go.
We have very little idea as to how they do things. We have seen NTDS equivalents. We have seen what we believe is a CEC equivalent. And those systems are in China's Navy. When you talk about compare and contrast, we're basically talking about digital communications. This is one of the areas where China is really pretty good. So what we really have to get into is how jam resistant are they? How intrusion defendable are they? So I can't just insert false data. We don't know that, and quite frankly, we don't accommodate that within the rules. The only thing we really allow for data links is jamming. The bottom line is it looks like China can exchange data fairly reliably with units within a task group or within their theater command.
All right. Any last comments on any products that you've remembered since we started talking about that? Any last minute additions, Larry?
Can't think of anything. People who have other questions, we're always at our email address, adtrgroup@aol.com. Facebook, people do send us questions on Facebook. That's not the best way to reach us because there's so much traffic. They're easy to miss. So email is your best bet.
Yeah, we miss those often.
And your group's IO message board mails or messages that email, correct?
Yeah,
I think yeah.
Groups IO will go to the 8ATR group. So I do see this. I just answered one from Gordon Dunn the other day. So yeah, that's a good path. Also, your Discord page.
This is a good question. I'm going to allow it last second because it's a good one.
Forward.
In my opinion, it's the Marines looking for money.
Marines looking for a mission. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
rightfully so, though, right? I think.
Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
Historically, this was the Army's mission. And if you look at other countries, it's the Army. So the Marine Corps getting rid of their tanks, trying to buy these LSMs, which are floating ducks, and then trying to pull this stuff together. Is it something that we need to do? Yes. Is it what the Marine Corps should be doing? I don't know. I'm not sure because this is them stepping out into an area that they've really never done before. Now, they have done island defense before. Not so much island strike capability outside of aircraft during World War II. And off a amphib. So I have the.
What about their expeditionary forces with light carriers and joint strike fighters? That strike capability is amazing, right?
Yeah, and was that the Marine Corps idea or was that the Navy's idea?
Well, right.
It's in concert. It's in concert.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key. Yeah. I think they're trying to integrate back towards the Navy better, I think, from what I can tell. Which I think is
I think that's good. And in terms of forward deployment, that would be fine. The problem I have is they don't have the mass to move, and they still even if they can go places, they have no ability to go against opposed landings. They don't have the mass. They don't have the ability to lift enough to all they can do is somebody.
What about their EABO capabilities, right? I mean, their capabilities of getting special forces into smaller enclaves that support the Navy in their roles.
Okay, how is that different than SEALs?
Right. To me, more the merrier, I guess. I don't know.
The Marine Corps reconnaissance guys don't do what SEALs do. They're more interested in looking at ways to put the Marines into the better place where they can get ashore without getting their butts blown up, and then helping them drive inward. It's two different missions, really, when you get down to it.
Very good. I think a huge topic unto itself, which I would love to explore more, by the way. All right. I need to introduce you all to the Littoral Commander.
I've got it.
Okay. We're gonna.
The other problem is that look at the Navy concept in Littoral Commander, and it's at best an adjunct.
Okay. All right. To be further debated. All right. Everybody have a great day, and great talking to you both, Larry and Chris. And we'll try to do this more often.
Take care, Peter.
All right. Have a good one.